In a strategic move, President Biden trims Asia trip, diverting attention to crucial G7 summit with China's agenda in the spotlight. Global leaders brace for key discussions on economic, security, and human rights challenges. To know more about this, we are joining live with Bill Gallo, VOA correspondent via Zoom. Hello, Bill Gallo. It's nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us here with us.
Very glad to be here.
You're welcome. As the first start, we would like to ask you about the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit, largely dominated the G7. But has anything changed regarding Zelensky's strategic position? Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the key question. I mean, the Ukrainian president obviously had a lot of eyes on him, and he got a lot of headlines at this meeting. He really overshadowed the whole G7 meeting, I would say. He also met a lot of leaders, a lot of key leaders that are very important for Ukraine's future battles. However, it's really not clear that he was able to convince the holdouts. I'm thinking specifically of India, which of course has been very reluctant to support Ukraine. Of course, it has very close ties with Russia in many ways. And then also where I'm at in South Korea, Vladimir Zelensky, of course, met with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol. It seemed to be a very cordial meeting, and aid from South Korea to Ukraine is increasing. However, there is no indication that South Korea will begin providing weapons to Ukraine, which is, of course, what Zelensky wants.
All right, thank you for the quick update, Bill. Now, you mentioned about India, and China was also a major focus of the G7. Were leaders able to overcome their disagreements about China, and how did Beijing respond?
I think this pretty much went as expected. There were condemnations of economic coercion. There was a call for, the status quo to remain as it relates to Taiwan. These are all things that have been said in past similar gatherings. As expected, even though the G7, asserted that these steps were not aimed at containing China, China doesn't feel that way. It responded very angrily. And one step they took today was to summon the Japanese ambassador in a show of anger at what happened at the G7.
And as we all know, President Biden had to cut short his Asia trip. How that being received in the region is, and what kind of message does it send about U.S. priorities and reliability?
I think there's no question that it was a disappointment, and not only for Papua New Guinea and Australia, where Biden was set to visit, but of course in the wider region. This is not the first time it's happened, and it probably won't be the last time. I think there's a lot of dysfunction in the United States, especially in Washington, D.C., and, that is the main issue here, not a single skipped summit. We can make up for that, and Blinken, I think, is doing admirably in that. But the key factor here is sort of the underlying issue, that U.S. political dysfunction seems to be holding the U.S. back from doing what policymakers want to do in Asia. And that's definitely felt in this part of the world. There's no mistake about it.
All right, so many diplomatic engagements happen on the sidelines of the G7, including a summit between Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. Now, Bill, how was important about that meeting?
It was a relatively short meeting. It wasn't certain that it would happen because of Biden's abbreviated schedule. It seems that all sides really prioritized this meeting. These are not happening automatically. I mean, this kind of meeting has not happened over the last 10 years very often. So it was important just on a symbolic level for these three leaders to get together and to say sort of the expected things. But it's also important because Japan and Korea feel the need to sort of continue the momentum as they improve relations with one another. This effort at improving relations is not necessarily popular in either country. So I think that there's an effort to sort of sustain the momentum, even if it's sort of through these boring, if you will, diplomatic engagements that send a very important message.
Effort to sustain the momentum, beautifully said. So thank you for the report, Bill. Have a nice day in South Korea today. We'll be back on the studio with more news from home.